I want to thank everyone for joining us today for this something that's really truly important. Every year, the Republican Study Committee produces a conservative, fiscally responsible budget that balances. For the last 4 years of Democrat control, we were the only budget produced in the entire House of Representatives. Now think about that for a second. Multi-trillion-dollar budget, and we produced the only budget. The Constitution specifically gives the power of the purse to the House. Yet the House has continuously surrendered that authority by failing to pass a budget. The President doesn't dictate spending levels, and neither does the Senate. We do. We'll never get our spending problem under control if we can't produce a budget. State governments, cities and counties, businesses and families, they all have to balance their budgets. They all have to live within their means, but apparently not here in Congress. Nearly every major problem facing our nation can be traced back to a failure to budget. The men and women up here with me today have put in a tremendous amount of work to produce this year's budget, and I'm proud to have Congressman Ben Cline leading that effort for us. You're going to hear from my colleagues about what's in this budget, but it all boils down to something we've heard the President say quite a few times this year. Show me your budget, and I'll show you your values. Our values are clearly on display with this budget. We're protecting life, we're defending our borders, we're strengthening our military, we're cutting taxes for working families, helping small businesses thrive, saving Medicare and Social Security for future generations, unleashing American energy production, and we're just getting started. I'm going to turn it over to the man who's led our budget and spending task force this year, my good friend Ben Cline. Congressman?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks, man.
I want to thank Chairman Hearn for his leadership at RSC. This budget has been a long time coming. It has been the result of hard work by the Budget Task Force, the members you see behind me, as well as members of RSC who have authored legislation and submitted that for inclusion in the budget. It affects every part of this budget process and across our nation's economic health. The reckless policies of President Joe Biden and congressional Democrats has created a record $10 trillion in new spending in just 2 years, caused historic inflation, and forced massive interest rate hikes. The RSC budget would implement common sense policies to prevent the impending debt disaster, tame inflation, grow the economy, protect our national security, and defund Biden's woke priorities. It balances the budget in 7 years. It includes common sense reforms to reduce spending by over $16 trillion in 10 years. It cuts non-defense discretionary spending by $5 trillion over 10 years. Provides for the common defense and stands up to America's enemies. Ensures our military has the resources and direction to combat communist China. It defunds Biden's woke policies on abortion, CRT, gender politics, among others. It secures the border and builds the wall. It fights Biden's open border agenda and funds the construction of a wall on our southern border. It implements H.R. 2, the Secure the Border Act, as well as RSC-endorsed border security framework, and includes additional reforms such as restoring the public charge rule. It unleashes North American energy production and restores energy independence to our nation. It ensures American energy and security by building upon H.R. 1, the Lower Energy Costs Now Act, which creates jobs, reduces energy costs, increases wages, and lowers the deficit. It repeals Biden's crony taxpayer-funded giveaways to unreliable and expensive energy sources. It fights the weaponized administrative state. It includes over hundreds of deregulatory actions and proposals to oppose Biden's radical expansion of the federal government. It rescinds Biden's funding for the IRS to harass and spy on hardworking Americans. It protects Americans from the radical woke agenda. It offers the most pro-life congressional budget ever, with dozens of pro-life member initiatives. It prohibits taxpayer funding for critical race theory and radical gender ideology. It fortifies religious liberty protections and First Amendment rights, and it protects our cherished Second Amendment rights. It empowers individuals through work and through tax cuts. It builds upon the successful work requirements of the 90s across all welfare programs. It removes barriers to family formation, such as marriage penalties. It makes the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act permanent, putting money back with American workers. It incentivizes companies to keep and add jobs in America through a pro-growth tax policy. And it saves Medicare and Social Security from the President Biden's destructive plan. It rejects Biden's plan to cut Social Security benefits by 23% in the next decade. It expands choice and competition in Medicare to lower premiums for tens of millions of seniors. And it adopts bipartisan measures to support Social Security solvency without affecting retirees in or near retirement. This budget is a common sense budget to restore fiscal responsibility for our nation. Again, I want to thank those members who have been so involved on the Budget Task Force for their hours that they have put into making this document so successful. And I want to recognize them now for comments as well. I'll start with our Communications Chair, Byron Dodd. See you? There he is. Good job.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. I want to thank, obviously, Chairman Hearn and my colleague from Virginia for leading the RSC in this effort to actually creating a blueprint for our country to be stabilized. This budget balances in 7 years, not something you hear in Washington. This budget cuts wasteful spending across the board, something you don't hear in Washington. This budget allows our country to become energy independent again, something you haven't heard in this town for a couple of years coming out of the Biden administration. This budget secures our border, and this budget does something that people like to talk about a little bit, but we actually do it. We do it in a common sense approach, in a bipartisan approach. We actually preserve Social Security and Medicare in this budget. We do it with simple proposals that allow insolvency to be pushed off. Under Joe Biden's plan, his budget, Social Security and Medicare will go insolvent. What that means for every senior is a 23% benefit cut across the board. And instead of taking the mantle and doing his job and trying to find a way to avert that, he's ignored it. He doesn't even want to talk about it. In the RSC budget, we actually talk about it. And we come up with a simple way to preserve that program and at the same time give our country an opportunity to cut spending, get our fiscal house in order so we can begin to find the future ways of repaying our nation's debt. A society cannot live and cannot survive if we massively overspend and massively borrow. You're not going to be able to sustain yourself. And I know typically in this town you never hear members of Congress talk this way, but the RSC is talking about this. This is a real budget with real policy that makes our country more innovative, allows our country to thrive and succeed, allows our people who want Social Security, our seniors, and Medicare, our seniors, to actually be able to sustain the benefits that they have and not have to have them be cut off and not caught up in the brinksmanship of DC politics. This is a budget that works for our country. But I would challenge a lot of my colleagues here in the House, on the Republican side of the aisle, to take time and review this budget and look at it and really come to support it, because this is a pathway to balancing our budget. I would challenge the Senate to finally do something. I'm not sure what they do, but to actually come up with a budget of their own, because it's important that we address the nation's fiscal issues. We cannot wait. We should do it now. And this budget is a great start. I fully support it. I would encourage my colleagues to do the same. And with that, I will hand it over to Rich McCormick, gentleman from Georgia.
Why are we doing this? And what does it mean? If I could summarize the Democrats' plan, it would be just spend more, not worry about the consequences of our actions into the future. Quite frankly, if we gave the Democrats everything they asked for this year, next year they'd be back with twice as much, because there's always a good cause to spend money. The problem is, no matter how much money you tax people, even if you took away every billionaire's money, all of it, you wouldn't be able to pay for what they want to spend. It's unsustainable. And so we actually have a plan that has fiscal responsibility, that puts the money back in the pocket of the people, so we can have self-determination like our Constitution has benefited us for decades, for hundreds of years. Right now, with this responsible plan, we keep benefits in place that have benefited America for decades. But what we haven't done is have a pipe dream of things we can't pay for. If you look into the future and what we're going to accomplish with this budget, you're going to see something sustainable into the future. Where if you look at taxing billionaires like the Democrats want to do, and the way they want to do it, billionaires will hide their money. They've shown that the more you increase taxes, the less revenue you get a lot of times. This actually gives you the ability to open up the economy that benefits everybody. It increases that tax base and puts people in charge of their own future. And especially benefits our children, who right now are going to be hamstrung with even trillions of dollars of debt that they'll never be able to pay off, no matter how much they make. And that's going to fall over to our grandchildren and future generations for decades to come. So I want to continue to push this, to encourage people to talk about it, to look at the details, because someone has to have a plan, and it is us today, and that's how the Constitution designed us. Thank you. And with that, I turn it over to Mr. Good.
Thank you. I want to congratulate Chairman Hearn for his leadership, and I also want to congratulate him for selecting my colleague in my neighboring district, Ben Klein, for the chairmanship of this budget task force. He's obviously the right man for the job. And as Congressman Donald said, we challenge the Republican Party to bring this budget to the floor for a vote, and every Republican should support this. This is a pathway showing us that we can balance the budget, we can restore fiscal responsibility in Washington. It demonstrates members of Congress who are willing to make the tough decisions, to tell the truth to the American people, and do what needs to be done to save the country from a fiscal standpoint for our children and our grandchildren. A default on our national debt is a certainty. It is a certainty. We had the artificial scare tactics of the last couple of weeks, the last couple of months leading up to the debt limit. That was artificial and that was scare tactics. A default is a certainty, however. If we don't begin to cut our spending, the path we're on now is unsustainable. So in addition to cutting spending and making the tough decisions, the responsible decisions, this budget is a pro-growth budget as well. It recognizes we increase our revenue by getting Americans back to work, by keeping taxes low, by reigniting American energy once again. It is a budget that works on the revenue side. It also works on the spending side, and it is a blueprint for success for our country. It honors the #1 responsibility the House of Representatives has, and that is to protect the financial standing, the economic standing of the House of Representatives, protect our ability to meet our obligations, to pay our debts, to borrow when necessary. And I thank Chairman Hearn and Chairman Klein for their leadership on this, and I introduce Mr. Eric Burleson from Missouri.
Thank you. I first want to say thank you to the leadership of Chairman Hearn and Ben Klein, as well as Byron Donalds. We spent a lot of time in meetings nationally over this, and I think this is an amazing product. Just 20 years ago, our national debt was $6.7 trillion, and at that point, it was still too high. Now it's $32 trillion, and we will most likely exceed $36 trillion by 2025. To put that in perspective, the average taxpayer owes $250,000 in taxes if we were to have to pay off the debt. So put that in perspective, every child born in America today is saddled with the burden of $250,000 in debt that they'll have to pay back. It's clear that Washington doesn't just have a spending problem, it has a spending addiction. And it doesn't help that President Biden and congressional Democrats took every chance that they could to fund liberal pet projects at the expense of the American people over the last 2 years. It's almost like they were trying to imitate Oprah Winfrey with all of the handouts. The American people can't afford this, and they don't want it. And they certainly don't want their tax dollars going towards woke, weaponized, and wasteful spending. So aggressive action is necessary to get our country's fiscal house back in order, and that's why I'm proud to stand along these amazing colleagues today to present the RSC fiscal year budget of 2024. Our proposals balance the budget in 7 years, cuts spending by $16.3 trillion over 10 years, and reduces taxes by $5 trillion. Beyond just the dollars and cents, it prioritizes what Americans actually care about. See, the RSC budget funds a southern border wall. It increases American energy production. It fully rescinds the funding of the new IRS agents, and it prohibits taxpayer funding from going to these woke and weaponized things like funding CRT and radical gender initiatives. It's time to cut the waste, pass a budget that reflects America's values, and put this country on a path towards a balanced budget. Again, I want to say thank you to the leadership of Chairman Hearn, as well as Ben Klein and Byron for this. And now I yield to the gentleman from Texas, Congressman Pat Fowler.
It's not a Pat, it's a Beth. Beth Van Dyne. Thank you all for joining us today. I hail from the great state of Texas. Texas is doing it right. Texas actually has a surplus. We have a rainy day fund. Since when have we had that in our country? When in the last 100 years have we had a surplus? We continue to spend in DC as if we're never going to actually have to pay that back. When I was mayor of the great city of Irving, Texas, and on city council for 12 years, we passed a balanced budget. Did we have people who wanted to spend more? Did we have staff who could show us a bunch of projects where we had to spend? Absolutely. But why did we do that? One, because we recognized that it was a fiscal responsible thing to do, but two, it was required by law. It is high time that we do that in our federal government as well. We took over the majority for a reason. The American people are sick of being taxed to high health. They're sick of the debt continuing to rise, and they recognize the fact that we do not continue to do this to future generations. If not now, when? If not us, then who? We have a high responsibility to do this for each of our citizens, and I really am very proud of the work the RSC, that Kevin Hahn, that Ben Klein, and others have done to bring forward this budget, and I highly recommend that all of our colleagues read it, learn it, and support it. And with that, Doug Martha.
Thank you. Appreciate it, Chairman Hearn and all my colleagues with RSC. Just blending through and sorry behind it. Obviously, this document is very, very important to move forward and start tackling the incessant spending we've had and bring things back, bring the arc back down and spending to something that eventually can work toward balance. So I'm pleased to be part of the Defunding Study Committee and with Chairman Hearn and all of our colleagues to do this. 4 of my bills are included in the package that aim to protect minors, prohibit taxpayer funding of a radical gender ideology, prohibit taxpayer funds for President Biden's international agreements that pay for loss and damage due to climate change, and uphold American medical freedom. These are important issues for myself, of course, the RSC, our Republican conference, and the American people, most importantly of all. The reckless policies of the Biden administration, the congressional Democrats have created a record $10 trillion in new spending in just a couple of years, resulting in historic inflation, massive interest rate hikes, and rapid acceleration towards a public debt crisis. This is why American people elected a Republican majority in the House, and I hope it will augment that in 2024 to turn around the horrific direction our country's going on its values and certainly its fiscal situation. So let's reduce spending, get a hold of this unaccountable bureaucracy now, and move in the right direction for prosperity once again of the American dream. Thank you. Now I will call on Josh Brasheen to come on up here.
Josh Burkeen from Oklahoma. Grateful to another member of the Oklahoma delegation, Kevin Hearn, and of course Ben Klein and Byron Donalds for their leadership in producing something that's courageous. And we have to have solutions for a nation that matches the size of our problems. And I think there are some people who, if they're honest, they look at this and say our financial situation is like the Titanic and they've given up hope. And what this budget is telling the American people, and thank you to those of you who have shown us that within 7 years, if we'll be courageous, there is hope. We are a ship that's taking on water. And we've got to stop being a Congress that keeps handing out spoons to solve the taking on of water. If you look at our overspend this year, it's about 1.5 trillion. If you go back to 1983, which is 40 years ago, that's the size of our gross national debt just 2 generations ago. Think of where you're at in 1983. Think about the optimism. Think about watching the Dukes of Hazzard. Whatever, that sets a mood for you to remember how fast and furious we've fallen from a heightened state where the size of 200 years of gross national debt in 1983 was 1.4 trillion, and this year we're going to overspend by that amount. And we have to have people that are willing to put their personal self-interest, their political interest aside, and put the country's best interest ahead. And this budget says we can do it. It's not just the 31 trillion. It's what the U.S. Treasury report keeps talking about, and everybody keeps burying their head in the sand. We'll talk about the gross national debt, but we forget the unfunded obligation element. And this budget talks about all of it. And when you add the unfunded obligation, and the U.S. Treasury report last year says if you take the unfunded obligations of Medicare, Social Security, what we owe veterans, federal employee pensions, and you add it plus the 31.5 trillion, it's 124 trillion. And if you want to get flush with the house again, everybody that's a taxpayer write a check for $1 million. Another way of analyzing the U.S. Treasury report says it's 86% of all wealth in America. Everybody take all of your fixed assets, write a check to get flush with the house, you'll have 15% left. We have to have solutions to match the size of our problem. And liberals and moderates are learning the game of giving away free candy. It's good politics. The health of our nation says we are choking. We are unhealthy. We are facing heart disease, we're facing tooth decay, and we got to start buying vegetables. We won't have a country left. Thank you to those men and women that are standing here going to move this agenda forward, because they understand it's time to have serious conversations for serious people to secure the blessing of liberty for our kids and their grandkids. And with that, I want to call upon Coach Roger Williams.
Skip.
Oh! I'm not going to talk about what I want to talk about. Just kidding. I'll be brief, but let me tell you, I'm a business guy. That's what I've done all my life, is be in business. And there's two ways to keep the books. You can cook the books, or you can balance the books. This right here balances the books. This gets our fiscal house in order. Now, a person out here doesn't have to balance your books when you go see a banker, when you deal with your family or anything else. And this government has just totally walked away from the responsibility that this committee has taken on and is going to fix. And I totally support it. And Beth said it too. You know, states have to do this. Why don't we have to do it as a Congress? Why shouldn't America lead the way instead of not even following? So, look, this is a good budget. Everybody needs to stand behind this. I congratulate everybody that's had a hand in it. It works. And like I say, we're going to cook the books, or we're going to balance the books. I think that's the way we need to go. Thank you, Chairman.
Next up will be Financial Services Committee, Fred Shep.
Well, this is a terrific piece of work. And for the 9 years I've served in the House, it's the only effort that comprehensively addresses the financial challenges of this country. And so I'm proud to support it, proud to be here. I've served under President Obama. I've served under President Trump. I've served under President Biden. And under none of those presidents have we had any serious engagement with this Congress on how to reduce spending, balance the budget, and fight about how to get to the lowest deficit of the year. How about when Democrats and Republicans thought zero deficits was an objective? Well, the pandemic did more than destroy families, kill people, and ravage the economy of the world. It ravaged the brains of a lot of people in this country that think you can keep borrowing and spending money and have no consequences. It's called modern monetary theory. And our former Budget Committee chairman, under Speaker Nancy Pelosi, John Yarmouth of Louisville, Kentucky, said that's actually right. That's the plan. It's perfectly fine. He adopted that. And what the RSC is saying and what House Republicans are saying is we want to go back to where we built a consensus around lower deficits, zero deficits, and get this economy growing and focused on it. I'm asked frequently as a member of House Financial Services, how do we make sure the dollar remains the reserve currency of the world? Because, you know, China's going to do that or some other make-believe place. The answer is if we take care of our business, like Roger Williams, and take care of our fiscal situation, we will be that reserve currency without question. We have the best legal system, the best regulatory system, the most dynamic economy, the most accepted currency in the world, the best business climate in the world, but what we don't have is the pristine fiscal picture we need to have. And that's why this plan innovates, prioritizes, and focuses what we need to do to have that fiscal future that we can all be proud of and leave a better country to our kids. So Ben Klein and Kevin Hearn, thank you. And let me call up Marjorie Taylor Greene next to give her views.
Thank
coming today, and as a business owner, this budget brought to the American people by the Republican Study Committee is very exciting for me. It's such a wonderful experience, and I'm so thankful Chairman Hearn, Representative Klein, and every member and staff that worked on this. Balancing the budget in 7 years is something to be proud of. It's something for all of us to be excited about. The Republican Study Committee is the majority of the majority. This is over half the Republicans in our conference that are supporting this great budget. It does everything by balancing the budget in 7 years, making permanent President Trump's tax cuts and savings plans, protecting our parents' and grandparents' investment in Social Security and Medicare, but it also takes care of our children. And I'm honored that my bill, the Protect Children's Innocence Act, has been included in this great budget because our kids are under attack today, and we have to protect them from the radical left's evil agenda that confuses children about what their gender is, that promotes these awful surgeries, causing mastectomies, hysterectomies, castration, for kids that haven't even grown up. They're not old enough to vote, they haven't gone to college, they can't join the military, and so much more of adult life and decisions. This also protects them from puberty blockers, hormone treatments, and I'm so proud that Republicans want to be the party to protect kids in the same way we want to be the party to protect the American people's hard-earned tax dollars, their ability to earn a living, support their families, and continue to live out their freedoms in America. Thank you so much, everyone that's involved, and we're going to take questions now. Thank you.
I wanted to let one more member speak, Tom Tiffany.
I will be very brief. America has a spending problem. The United States government has a spending problem, not a revenue problem. But I just want to take my colleagues and all of you back to when I was first elected to the Wisconsin State Legislature in 2010. We had a $3 billion deficit. It is why I ran for office. It was unacceptable. People thought we won't get out of this forever. I remember being out on the campaign trail in 2010 saying to people that if you give us a series of budgets over the course of a decade, we will fix this. And if you look at Wisconsin's fiscal health now, that is exactly what happened. It took some hard decisions. Many of you remember 2011, we had a little kerfuffle in Wisconsin state government at the Capitol, and but we made those hard decisions. And now the state is so much better because of it. And that's why I'm so pleased to be able to be included as one of the authors of this document that we have before us, because this is the blueprint. This is the roadmap to be able to get us in the next decade back to fiscal responsibility here in America, and we owe the American people exactly that.
We're gonna take a couple questions here before we have to all go vote, but, right here.
I know there's, I've had time to read the whole budget, but so I know there's been some calls that cut funding to the DOJ. How much is your, the RC budget cut funding to the DOJ? How much, what we do in that?
Yeah, so we can get into specifics in the budget, so I don't have the dollar amounts right in front of me, but it's going to readjust the size of government, go after accountability for the American people, much like what you've seen going on in the committee work right now. It's represented in the budget as we move forward. So this budget will be represented downsizing, limiting the control of government over the American people, which is conservative value, limited government, and we represent that in the budget, as well as getting our fiscal house in order so that we can have a better view of our future. Yes, sir.
Mr. Hurt, can you clarify, what does it exactly do on the Social Security retirement age for future retirees? And the last budget had a Medicare retirement age adjustment that doesn't seem to be in here.
Well, what we did, first of all, in the budget, and again, Congressman Klein had to go for an appropriations vote, but what we did here specifically is looked at the problem as it's laid out. And here's what we have to first recognize, that there is a problem. And it is in this budget window. And regardless if we want to not talk about it or not, it's going to occur in the next decade. And the president did nothing to even acknowledge it existed, which is an intellectually dishonest position to take with the American people, those who are at retirement, in retirement, that have worked their entire lives, to pay into that particular program, whether it be Social Security, Medicare, or both. And when you look at what we're talking about is going back in their age group, and anybody that's near retirement, as the chairman said, we're not touching that. We're looking at additional PIA payments that are made out there and looking at adjusting those. We're looking at how you roll back. And so we laid out the whole program and said these are solutions to this. But what we do say in all of this is it needs to be a bipartisan approach. What we can't have happen is to try to take a one-sided approach, because when that does occur, and as it has occurred, as it's occurring right now, it becomes something that's used as a partisan tool. And the people that lose in this are the American seniors. The people that are getting ready to retire, that have counted on this their entire life, who have lent their money, their payroll taxes, as you all are doing every single day, to count on a retirement, to count on your health insurance to be taken care of, your health care to be taken care of. That's dishonest with the American people. We address that in here specifically. Yes, ma'am.
Just your reaction to the Federal Reserve being involved in the decision and the final follow-up.
Yeah, I've just read the articles out there, but I think we probably should have looked at maybe one more rate hike just to ensure that inflation was down and it wasn't some anomaly. I think the last thing I saw, the markets were reacting kind of negatively to it as well. So, we've had Chairman Powell's Republican Study Committee luncheons about 6 or 8 weeks ago, and he was concerned about really two things. One of which both which we addressed in our budget. One was he was concerned, as was reported out of the luncheon, that our spending was growing 2 to 3 times faster than our revenue growth, 4 times as fast, which nobody can do that in our household. You can't do it in your business, your cities, your counties, or your states. He said we've got to get that under control. We do that. The second thing is that this persistent gap between job openings and people seeking jobs has got to be closed. And what he acknowledged in there is that because of his dual mandate of price stability and full employment, the nature of continuing to raise interest rates will close the job creation side. He said it's your job to get people back to work. We do that in this budget as well. So we're doing our part. The Fed has to do their part. I think time will tell over the remainder of this week and next week whether we got it right or not at the Treasury. So we'll see.
And just a quick follow-up, please correct me if I'm wrong, but it's my understanding that this budget sets levels at the 2022 fiscal spending levels, is that right?
Yes.
If so, there's likely going to be pushback from many members who voted for that debt ceiling bill, saying, it's not acceptable considering the debt ceiling bill is set at a much higher level. Why set this budget at 2022 fiscal spending levels, considering you expect pushback?
Well, again, I've said this in many interviews. When we stayed at like 2022 level, we have to remember that was about when we started having this conversation. It was like 6 months ago, and as I've said, many people across the aisle and down the other end of Washington Mall made it sound like we were going back to spending levels of 1950, and we were talking about really 6 months ago, and that was kind of a rammed down Omni with special interests in there, not just for Democrats, but for Republicans also on the other end of the Capitol. And we're resetting that. That's what we're doing, and going back to say, what does the fiscal spending levels need to look like post-COVID? And as one of the gentlemen up here said a minute ago, it's like we've forgotten that we dumped literally trillions of dollars into the economy for the purposes of making sure the economy stayed as good as it could and borrowed as much as we could. Now it's time to reset that. Just as you would do in an economic downturn in your own household or in your business, we have to get back and be accountable to the American taxpayer dollars. Because remember, there are no federal dollars, there are only taxpayer dollars. Yes, sir.
You're presenting a budget today, but the actual budget committee has yet to produce a budget, and it's June already. Can you address at all why Republicans haven't been able to unite behind a budget that could actually pass the House this year?
No, I can't. I mean, I don't sit on the budget committee. I did the first 2 years I was there. It was under John Yarmouth's chairmanship then. We didn't talk about budgeting. We talked about pretty much everything else but budgeting when I was on there for 2 years. I can tell you from an RSC standpoint, the framework of our budget has been done for a while, but we were concerned, quite honestly, that the White House, and if you watch President Biden's comments about the debt limit deal, he himself, the President of the United States, talked about the budget deal. He didn't even understand the difference between a debt limit deal and a budget, which is exactly what we feared, that he couldn't grasp, put his mind around what was literally happening in order to make sure that we increase the debt limit to pay our bills and go forward. We wanted to make sure that confusion didn't occur. We adjusted based on what was the most the current trend line from the CBO, and that's in this budget. This budget is the latest information from the CBO on the trend line. Yes, ma'am.
Do you expect to have a floor vote on moving?
Yes.
Leadership estimating?
Yes.
Do you think it will pass?
That's why we have a vote, right? Yeah, who knows today, right? Yes, sir.
If I could follow up on something, since Mr. Klein said we have no specific information, references a moderate increase eventually in the adult rate for Social Security. Can you tell us what that is to be and when to finish that?
Well, remember what we're doing is we're dealing with increment, factors to Social Security, and the president wants to have to do nothing about it. That would allow for a 23% cut in benefits immediately to all seniors. So what we've done is increased the retirement age by 3 months per year, but not for current or newly retirees. Currently, those individuals are 59 who would see an increase beginning in 2026 until age is 69, or beginning age 62 in 2033. So again, we are taking action, whereas the White House and Democrats refuse to acknowledge Social Security and Medicare are facing insolvency, and to avoid that 23% cut, we take moderate steps that have had bipartisan support in the past to address this looming crisis.
Have you dropped the Medicare age change from last year?
Yes, that is not in this.
Who do you expect a floor vote on this budget before any of the public appropriations bills are brought to the floor?
We would hope that we would have a budget vote soon. Appropriations bills are moving. Full committee, apologize for checking out. But the full committee is acting on bills, and so during the appropriations process, we hope to have that budget considered, because it does set the tone for how aggressively we're going to confront this unsustainable debt.
And if I can ask one on the appropriations process, I know that the committees are marking up the appropriations bills at fiscal year 22 levels for at least the majority of these appropriations bills. Some Democrats are criticizing the appropriations committee and Republicans on that committee for kind of backtracking and breaking their promise that was made during the Biden-McCarthy debt limit deal. Just your response to that.
Well, as the speaker has indicated, the debt limit deal provided for ceilings and limits. If the appropriations committee chooses to spend less than those limits, that's completely within the framework of the agreement. Now, are the senators talking about spending beyond the limit? They are, and that's of concern, because that would definitely violate the spirit of the agreement that Senator Schumer.
How confident are you that you can pass appropriations bills before?
Very confident. The chairwoman is doing a fantastic job of managing the committee, and we anticipate seeing bills on the floor very soon.
One more question, we gotta go, guys.
If I could ask about, you referenced the fact that some of the tougher entitlement discussions will have to be bipartisan. Do you all have a recommendation on whether it's a commission, or how do you see bipartisan discussions happen about the biggest budgetary challenges?
Well, we would like to have support for engaging on these issues from the White House. We haven't seen that to date. Instead, we've seen demagoguery and attacks, baseless attacks. And so what we hope is that the White House engages, the Senate engages,